I'm George Washington. I was the general during the Revolutionary War. On July 9th, 1776, my officers read the Declaration of Independence to the soldiers to inspire them. At night, on December 25th, 1776, I led my troops across the Delaware River to surprise the enemy. At night, on January 3rd, 1777, we fled with our campfires lit to trick the British. For 6 months at Valley Forge, I fed my troops very little food because we didn't have a lot of it. After I was the president for 8 years, I said I wanted to retire. I bred American foxhounds to help me hunt. I bled to death on December 14th, 1799. Was George Washington a general? Yes, he was. Was he a general or a garbage man? He was a general. Was he a captain? No, he wasn't a captain. He was a general. What was his job? He was a general. Was he a general during the Revolutionary War? Yes, he was. During which war was he a general? He was a general during the Revolutionary War. Did George Washington's officers read the Declaration of Independence? Yes, they did. Yes, they did read the Declaration of Independence. Yes, they read the Declaration of Independence. Did they read the Declaration of Independence or the Constitution? They read the Declaration of Independence. Did they read an encyclopedia? No, they didn't read an encyclopedia. They read the Declaration of Independence. Did they read a dictionary? No, they didn't read a dictionary. They read the Declaration of Independence. Did they read a magazine? No, they didn't read a magazine. They read the Declaration of Independence. Did they read an email? No, they didn't read an email. They read the Declaration of Independence. Did they read a novel? No, they didn't read a novel. They read the Declaration of Independence. Did they read a newspaper? No, they didn't read a newspaper. They read the Declaration of Independence. Did they read a Facebook post? No, they didn't read a Facebook post. They read the Declaration of Independence. What did they read? They read the Declaration of Independence. When did they read it? They read it on July 9th, 1776. Did they read it in July? Yes, they did. Yes, they did read it in July. Yes, they read it in July. In what month did they read it? They read it in July. In what year did they read it? They read it in 1776. Who did they read it to? They read it to the soldiers. Did they read it to the zebras? No, they didn't read it to the zebras. They read it to the soldiers. Did they read it to the skunks? No, they didn't read it to the skunks. They read it to the soldiers. Why did they read it to the soldiers? They read it to them to inspire them. Did they read it to them to inspire them? Yes, they did. Yes, they did read it to them to inspire them. Yes, they read it to them to inspire them. Did George Washington lead his troops? Yes, he led them. Did he lead his troops or his kangaroos? He led his troops. He led his troops. Did he lead his robots? No, he didn't lead his robots. He led his troops. Did he lead his football team? No, he didn't lead his football team. He led his troops. Where did he lead them? He led them across the Delaware River. He led them across the Delaware River. Did he lead them across the Delaware River or the Mississippi River? He led them across the Delaware River. Did he lead them across the Delaware River or under the Delaware River? He led them across the Delaware River. Did he lead them above the Delaware River? No, he didn't lead them above the Delaware River. He led them across the Delaware River. Why did he lead them across the Delaware River? He led them across the Delaware River to surprise the enemy. Did he lead them across the Delaware River to surprise the enemy? Yes, he did. Yes, he did lead them across the Delaware River to surprise the enemy. Yes, he led them across the Delaware River to surprise the enemy. Did Washington and his troops flee? Yes, they did. Yes, they did flee. Yes, they fled. When did they flee? When did they flee? They fled on January 3rd, 1777. They fled January 3rd, 1777. Did they flee in 1776? No, they didn't flee in 1776. They fled in 1777. Did they flee in 1778? No, they didn't flee in 1778. They fled in 1777. In what year did they flee? They fled in 1777. Did they flee in January or February? They fled in January. In what month did they flee? They fled in January. Did they flee to trick the British or the French? They fled to trick the British. Did they flee to trick the British or the Chinese? They fled to trick the British. Why did they flee? They fled to trick the British. They fled to trick the British. Did they flee with their campfires lit? Yes, they did. Yes, they did flee with their campfires lit. Yes, they fled with their campfires lit. Did they flee with their campfires lit or with their torches lit? They fled with their campfires lit. How much food did George Washington feed his troops at Valley Forge? Very little. He fed them very little food. Did he feed them a lot of food or very little food? He fed them very little food. Why did he feed them very little food? He fed them very little food because they didn't have a lot of it. Where did Washington feed his troops very little food? He fed them very little food at Valley Forge. Did he feed them very little food in New York City or at Valley Forge? He fed them very little food at Valley Forge. How long did he feed them very little food? He fed them very little food for 6 months. Did he feed them very little food for 6 months or for 7 months? He fed them very little food for 6 months. Why did he feed them very little food for 6 months? He fed them very little food for 6 months because they didn't have a lot of it. Did he feed them in Chicago? No, he didn't feed them in Chicago. He fed them at Valley Forge. Was George Washington the president? Yes, he was. Yes, he was the president. Was he the president of the United States or of Japan? He was the President of the United States. Was he the President of Argentina? No, he wasn't the President of Argentina. He was the President of the United States. Of what country was George Washington the President? He was the President of the United States. How long was he the President of the United States? He was the President of the United States for 8 years. Was he the President of the United States for 4 years or 8 years? He was the President of the United States for 8 years. What did he say after he was President of the United States? He said he wanted to retire. After he was President of the United States, he said he wanted to retire. Did he say he wanted to retire or to play basketball? He said he wanted to retire. Did he say he wanted to dance? No, he didn't say he wanted to dance. He said he wanted to retire. Did he say he wanted to sing? No, he didn't say that. He said he wanted to retire. Did George Washington want to retire? Yes, he did. Yes, he did want to retire. Yes, he wanted to retire. Did he want to be a king? No, he didn't want to be a king. He wanted to retire. Did he want to be an emperor? No, he didn't want to be an emperor. He wanted to retire. Did he breed dogs or cats? He bred dogs. He bred dogs. Did he breed kangaroos? No, he didn't breed kangaroos. He bred dogs. Did he breed mules? No, he didn't breed mules. He bred dogs. What animal did he breed? He bred dogs. What kind of dogs did he breed? He bred American foxhounds. Why did he breed American foxhounds? He bred American foxhounds to help him hunt. Did he bleed? Yes, he did. Yes, he did bleed. Yes, he bled. Did he bleed a lot or a little? He bled a lot. Did he bleed a little? No, he didn't bleed a little. He bled a lot. How much did he bleed? He bled a lot. Why did he bleed a lot? He bled a lot because of old medical procedures.